Welcome. This is day 5 of the Seek My Father 30-day prayer challenge. I am Tamika. I'm the leader of God on the Rise Ministries, a prophetic deliverance ministry leading believers back to the heart of God and deeper relationship. So, the purpose of this prayer challenge, if you are just joining us, the purpose of this prayer challenge is we are taking the time to spend time in daily prayer, growing in relationship with God. Now, my ministry is all about deeper relationship. It's all about having encounters with God. It's all about growing in relationship with God. And that is what this 30-day prayer challenge is all about. And so, excuse me, throughout this prayer challenge, we are focusing on 5 areas and getting closer to God, getting to know God so that we can go into that deeper relationship. And those 5 areas are intimacy with God, hearing God, knowing God, trusting God, and following God. So, throughout this prayer challenge, this 30-day challenge, we are going to be focusing on those 5 topics, what it looks like in prayer, and how we can use that to grow in relationship with God. And so, our topic for today is teach me how to be your friend. We are learning how to be a friend of God. And this is a real thing. You can be a friend of God. There's a lot of people I've learned that don't realize that we can be God's friend. And there's Abraham in the Bible who was actually called God's friend. And we're going to talk a little bit about that too. But let's start out with what is a friend. Now, we all know generally what a friend is, but I'm big on words. I'm big on the definition of words because I like to understand things. So, the definition of friend is one that is attached to another person by affection, one that is not hostile towards that particular person. Now, hostile definition of that word, it's unfriendly, it's angry, it's aggressive, combative, bitter, spiteful, opposed to or resistant to someone. It's having an offensive nature towards someone. And I want us to remember these words. Think about these words because we're going to talk about this as it relates to us and our relationship with God in just a little bit. But one thing about hostility is you do not have to be physically violent to be hostile. You do not have to be physically violent to be hostile towards someone. You can be hostile in your attitude. You can be hostile in how you treat somebody, right? So, but to be a friend is to have an intimate relationship with them, a personal relationship, a familiar relationship. It's kind of like having a sidekick. You know, we know what a sidekick is. We know about superheroes and all of that. Superheroes usually have their sidekick, that one person that is always fighting next to them, right? So having a friend is like having a sidekick. We know this. All right. So here's what I need many of you to know right now. Excuse me. By definition of the word friend, many Christians right now are not friends of God like they think they are. Now, I'm going to be honest with y'all. As I was studying for this message, to teach this message today, I had to pause and I had to reevaluate my own relationship and attitude with God. And I had to realize that there have also been times when I have not been a friend to God, when I have been hostile to God, when I have been opposed to God, resistant to Him, when I've been offended by Him, when I've been bitter towards Him, combative towards Him, you know? So, and I bet that many of you, if you sat down and thought about it, I bet many of you have been in that situation as well. But how can we not be this way, right? We want God to teach us how to be His friend. We don't want to be in opposition to God for obvious reasons, but this is about growing in relationship with God. So we want to make sure that we can be in one accord with Him. We can walk in alignment with Him, right? So let's go to James chapter 2, verse 23 for our first scripture for today. James chapter 2, verse 23. And it says, "And the scripture was fulfilled, which says, Abraham believed God, and it was accounted to him for righteousness, and he was called the friend of God. So Abraham was the first person in the Bible that we ever hear about being called the friend of God. So what was special about Abraham that made God call him a friend? This is what we need to know so that we can figure out how we can be a friend of God as well. All right. So the first thing that it says that Abraham believed God. That means Abraham trusted God. That means what God said to Abraham, he obeyed him. He trusted him. He knew that God was on his side. He knew that God was his friend. So he could trust him, right? Because we said that a friend is one who's attached to another person by affection. It's one who's familiar. It's a sidekick type of person, right? So God knew that Abraham knew that he could trust God. God had already proven himself to Abraham. Now, just as a little backstory, if you don't know a whole lot about the story of Abraham, Abraham grew up in a pagan family full of idol worshippers, right? They were worshiping other gods, worshiping statues, all that good stuff. And so God called Abraham away from his family and sent him into another land to start a new life and to become a worshiper of him. Okay. Now, Abraham had no clue where he was going. He didn't know all he knew is God told him to get up and leave, pack up your family. We about to go. And he trusted God enough to just get up with no other information and leave. That's some trust. That's big in itself, right? And so Abraham later was called by God to sacrifice his son on an altar. Now, God didn't let him actually kill his son. It was a test to see if he was going to obey, and he passed the test. God didn't allow him to kill his son, but he did show God that he was willing to do whatever God told him to do. So, because of this is why Abraham was called a friend of God, because he believed God, because he trusted God, and it was accounted to him as righteousness, as this scripture says. What that means is righteousness just simply means being in right standing with God. That means you're in alignment with God. That means you're walking on one accord with God, walking in obedience. You're walking as a friend of God. So righteousness also means being acceptable to God. So because Abraham believed God, because Abraham obeyed God, even to the point of potentially killing his son, it made him acceptable to God because God knew that he could trust him. And because he could trust him, he called him a friend. So it starts with our faith. It starts with our belief. We need to all ask ourselves as we go through this prayer challenge, as we go through day 5, do I trust God? First of all. And if I trust God, how much do I trust God? Excuse me. All right, so now we're going to go to James chapter 4, verse 4. This one says, adulterers and adulteresses, do you know or do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Whoever therefore wants to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. Now, what does that mean? Whew. I'm just not trying to be an enemy of God. That's just all I know. All right. But what does this mean? So it says that friendship with the world is enmity with God. So first of all, let's see what enmity means. Enmity, to have enmity towards somebody means to be in opposition to that person, to hate that person, to have hostility towards that person, whether it's in action or I'm sorry, whether it's in violent action or whether it's in your attitude towards that person or the way that you treat that person, is to have hostility towards that person. So this verse tells us that if we are friends with the world, meaning if we are close up and personal with the world, intimate with the world, having the world as a sidekick of ours, we are actually now opposed to God. Why? Because the world will never align with God. It won't. There are people in the world that will choose to align themselves with God, but the world in general, the world will never align with God. Why? Because the world wants to go off and do its own thing. The world doesn't want to obey God. Nothing about the world will please God, which is why one day it's going to all be destroyed. That's another story. However, let's keep going. It says, whoever wants to therefore be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. if we so what we need to work on is being in alignment with God, walking in one accord with God. So this is what we're asking God for day 5 to teach us how to do. Teach us how to walk in alignment with him. Teach us how to be in agreement with him. Teach us how to obey him. Teach us how to follow him. Teach us how to we learned about intimacy the first day. Teach us how to be intimate with God. Teach us how to be close and familiar with God. So that's all. This is our prayer point for today. Teach me how to be your friend. So this is day 5. So since we're doing this now here at 7 p.m., this is actually day 4. We're finishing up day 4 right now, but this is for tomorrow. So tomorrow is actually day 5. So the prayer point for tomorrow, as we're going about our day, we're just gonna, just whenever you get a chance, I encourage all of you just to spend some time in prayer, just to spend some time asking God, how can I be your friend? Teach me how to be your friend. What does that look like? What does that mean? What do I have to do to be your friend? What type of attitude do I need to have? What type of behavior do I need? Just what does that look like to be a friend of God? And I encourage everyone to spend some time just sitting in his presence, talking to him. This challenge is called Sitting with My Father. And I meant that in a very literal way. Sitting with God, even if it's just for 5 minutes, just sit. Ask God the question, God, how do I be your friend? Teach me how to be your friend. And then sit and listen. I'm a big fan of journaling. I talk about this all the time. Pull out a notebook, pull out a pen, sit, listen, whatever comes to your mind regarding friendship with God, just write it down. And you'll learn that as you begin to do this, as you get in the habit of doing this, you'll learn that God actually speaks to all of us. I get questions all the time about how do you hear from God? Excuse me, people ask me all the time, how can I hear from God the way that you hear from God? God speaks to me all the time, but God also speaks to you all the time. We're just not always in a position to hear him. I was just talking to somebody recently explaining that the closer you get to somebody, the closer in proximity you get to somebody, you can hear them better. If I'm standing here and I'm yelling at you and you're a mile away, you're not going to hear anything that I'm saying. Now you might be able to see me well enough to see that I'm yelling at you, but you won't be able to hear me. But you come a little bit closer, and the closer you come, the closer you come, the closer you come, the better your hearing becomes. So the way that we hear God is through what we're doing right now. We sit with him. We train ourselves to listen to him. The world moves fast. We're very impatient people. We don't sit a lot. We don't just sit and listen. But let's train ourselves through this prayer challenge to just sit, listen to God, see what he has to say to us, see what he wants to say to us. But for day 5 tomorrow, prayer point, teach me how to be your friend. And God might give you a scripture, or you might just have thoughts come to your head. He might speak to you through your thoughts. Whatever. Just be open to however he wants to speak to you. Don't limit him, because God speaks in a lot of ways. He can speak through songs, he can speak through other people. So, yeah, that's all I got. So, day 5, teach me how to be your friend. So you guys meet me back here tomorrow at 7 p.m. for day 6 of the Sitting with My Father 30-day prayer challenge. I hope you guys are enjoying this so far. If you have any comments, questions, concerns, whatever, or any testimonies, if you've been going through this so far and it's been benefiting you, or you've been learning anything, whatever, leave it in the comments, because we also learn from each other. So you leaving your story or leaving your comments in the comments might help somebody else, who knows, or encourage somebody else to keep going, who knows. So you guys have a great night. See you back here tomorrow at 7 p.m. for day 6.